Imagine this. Your mom begs to move into your tiny apartment. You say no, and the whole family calls you heartless. But what if she was hiding a secret so big it changes everything you thought you knew about her? That's what happened to me, and here's the story. I never thought I would bring family business to the internet, but my mother and I turned apologies into a sport I keep losing. I am 30, she is 56, and the story keeps changing depending on who is tired. I steadied my breathing and counted to 3. I run a tiny production company that edits ads for local shops and schools. It is legal, small, and the kind of dream that fits inside a carry-on bag. I kept my voice low, so I would not break the room. 2 years ago, my mother insisted I open a business account with her as emergency cosigner. She said safety is not control. It just looks similar on paper. I reminded myself to use kind words even when they felt heavy. At the time, I shrugged and signed because rent was louder than principles. I told myself the co-signature was training wheels that would fall off later. I pictured tomorrow and promised to arrive with better manners. My father died when I was 8, and since then my mother moves money like a firefighter moves hoses. Everything looks urgent when you live with memory of flames. I washed my hands and told them to unclench. She worked double shifts in billing at a clinic, then balanced church ledgers on weekends. Numbers relaxed for her in a way people rarely did. I let the silence do math and tried not to argue with it. Last spring, I took a big contract with a startup run by my friend Devin. We promised deliverables, we bought lights, and we spoke in plural like we were a family. I thought about being 12 and wishing time would hurry. 3 months in, the startup ghosted invoices and moved headquarters to a new suite with the same chairs. Devin texted thumbs-up emojis where money should have been. I held my tongue and saved a sharper sentence for later. I covered freelancers with my savings to keep my name clean. I told Mom the storm would pass if I kept rowing. I measured the distance between us and called it weather. She visited my office, looked at my whiteboard, and asked where the cash reserves were sleeping. I sat under optimism and 2 folding tables. I tried to forgive the hour for being crowded. The next week, my business debit card stopped working at a rental house. The bank said the account was frozen by the cosigner pending review. I steadied my breathing and counted to 3. I stood in the parking lot holding a coil of cable and a new kind of anger. Devin said this was dramatic and sent another emoji. I kept my voice low, so I would not break the room. I confronted my mother, and she did not apologize. She said she saw irregular vendor transfers and locked the doors before a thief taught me regret. I reminded myself to use kind words even when they felt heavy. I called it sabotage, she called it triage, and neither word paid the rental fee. We did not speak for a month except through receipts. I pictured tomorrow and promised to arrive with better manners. The bank unfroze the account after she produced a spreadsheet thicker than a Bible. The balance looked healthier than my mood. I washed my hands and told them to unclench. I lost the rental discount and 2 clients who were allergic to uncertainty. My mother told me I could rebuild a reputation faster than I could rebuild a savings account. I let the silence do math and tried not to argue with it. I told her she cost me trust. She said trust without verification is a fairy tale with good lighting. I thought about being 12 and wishing time would hurry. Then winter came with a roof leak at her apartment. The landlord smiled with legal teeth and offered a bucket. I held my tongue and saved a sharper sentence for later. A pipe burst, the ceiling sagged, and she had to move out for repairs. She packed her life into plastic bins labeled by season and worry. I measured the distance between us and called it weather. She asked if she could stay with me for a month, maybe 2. I looked at my 1 bedroom, my equipment, and my unfinished resentment. I tried to forgive the hour for being crowded. I told her I would pay for a motel and meals while the apartment was fixed. I said cohabitation would be a battlefield neither of us could afford. I steadied my breathing and counted to 3. She said a son who will not share his roof is a stranger with my face. I said a mother who freezes her child's company is a landlord with my last name. I kept my voice low so I would not break the room. Family chat exploded with opinions that sounded like sermons. My aunt used the phrase, honor thy mother, as if it were a coupon code. I reminded myself to use kind words even when they felt heavy. I booked the motel anyway, and dropped off groceries like apologies with barcodes. She accepted the key card like evidence for a trial. I pictured tomorrow and promised to arrive with better manners. The social worker assigned by the city called me thorough and detached. It said I was simply budgeting for dignity. I watched my hands and told them to unclench. My mother told anyone who would listen that her son is too proud to make room for love. I told the mirror that pride and boundaries wear the same shirt. I let the silence do math and tried not to argue with it. Devin resurfaced with a new company name and a pitch deck. He offered back pay and equity that glowed like a novelty lamp. I said I prefer electricity that pays bills. I thought about being 12 and wishing time would hurry. Meanwhile, the motel costs stacked like polite bricks. I visited every other day, trying to sound like a son and not a project manager. I held my tongue and saved a sharper sentence for later. She watched true crime and corrected the accounting and voiceovers. I wiped condensation off the window and wished I were better at gentleness. I measured the distance between us and called it weather.
On day 12.
She asked to see my office. I said yes, because I am still a child when she asks to see my art. I tried to forgive the hour for being crowded. She stood in front of the timeline and read my sticky notes like weather reports. She asked why one vendor name appeared on 3 invoices with different addresses. I steadied my breathing and counted to 3. I said because freelancers move. She said because thieves change masks. We agreed to disagree and both went home tired. I kept my voice low so I would not break the room. The next morning I found a registered letter on my desk. It detailed a tax inquiry triggered by payments from Devin's startup to my company. I reminded myself to use kind words even when they felt heavy. I felt the floor shift like an elevator, pretending to be a rug. I called my accountant. He said we would be fine if records were clean. I pictured tomorrow and promised to arrive with better manners. My records were clean like a kitchen at midnight after a party. Organized by intention, sticky at the edges, I watched my hands and told them to unclench. I called my mother for the bank statements and she said she'd already printed them and also spoke to the revenue officer. I forgot how to inhale for 3 seconds. I let the silence do math and tried not to argue with it. The officer asked for clarifications I did not have. My mother answered with page numbers and color-coded tabs. I thought about being 12 and wishing time would hurry. He thanked her and said the matter looked containable. I celebrated by sitting on the floor and pretending to stretch. I held my tongue and saved a sharper sentence for later. When I asked why she always acted first, she said fire travels faster than permission slips. I asked why she never trusted me to hold a hose. I measured the distance between us and called it weather. She said she trusts me to hold a camera, not a match. I said her metaphors make me feel 12 and flammable. I tried to forgive the hour for being crowded. Repairs at her apartment dragged, the landlord discovered mold, and the timeline walked backward. She asked again to stay with me. I repeated the motel offer plus a storage unit and meal plan. She called me an app with shoes. My uncle called to inform me that in our culture parents live with children when storms come. I said in our culture storms come every weekend. I visited the storage unit to rearrange guilt. I stacked boxes of our family photos next to old tax folders labeled with my father's name. A small safe sat in the back, like a patient chair. I recognized it from the garage of our old house before we moved. I asked my mother about the safe, and she said it held papers that tell a longer version of the truth. She handed me the key and told me to read like an adult. Inside were birth certificates, a deed I did not recognize, and a file labeled guardianship. My name appeared on documents from when I was 5. The papers said my biological mother was my mother's younger sister. There was a court order granting custody to the woman I call Mom. I sat down on the storage unit floor and stared at a puddle of light. Past I did not order had arrived with shipping included. My mother said her sister struggled with pills and nights that refused to end. She said she would have told me at 18, but 18 turned into later and later. I asked if my father knew. She said he knew, and he learned to love a child outside the paperwork. I asked why freeze my account then. She said because predators hunt families that bleed, and our last name was dripping. She said Devin's transfers looked like laundering with extra friendliness. She said she would rather be hated than let me learn crime by osmosis. I told her I am not a child, and she said adults can burn down houses with better vocabulary. We both sighed like old doors. The next day I opened another envelope from the safe. It contained letters from a trust company addressed to a trustee named after my mother. The beneficiary was me. The corpus was a mix of insurance payout leftovers, small inheritance, and something called retained earnings. There was a ledger showing deposits that matched the period when my account was frozen. The amounts looked like life rafts stacked in a closet. I called the number on the letter, and a patient man confirmed the trust existed. He said distributions could start when a specified condition was met. The condition read, at the trustee's discretion, when the beneficiary demonstrates financial boundaries without sacrificing care. I laughed because legal poetry is weirdly specific. I told my mother I found the trust and asked why the riddle. She said she needed a rule harder than moods. She said she had watched love become enabling in her sister's life, and she swore to break the pattern. I wanted to hug and argue at the same time. I slept poorly and dreamed in spreadsheets. In the morning, I offered to tour assisted living options near her clinic. She said she was not fragile glass, said independence does not mean living under a waterfall. She accused me of outsourcing affection. I accused her of hoarding control. To prove I am not a villain, I cooked soup in the motel microwave, and we ate on the bed like teenagers. It felt almost normal until the fire alarm chirped. Devin texted again, asking whether I could do one more rush edit for equity. I sent a link to a Cash App and received a GIF of someone shrugging in response. He meant my mother. He always means my mother. That night I told her I could not host her, but I would cover 2 more weeks at the motel and a storage upgrade. She nodded without blinking like a professional patient. She asked if I hated her. I said hate is a strong word I reserve for autoplay ads. She laughed and then coughed and then pressed her palm to the hollow of her neck. I asked if she was okay. She said the motel air is dramatic. I went home and stared at the safe papers again. Guardian is a word that weighs more when you read it slowly. My aunt, the woman I never met sober, had signed a final letter at a rehab I had never visited. The letter thanked my mother for raising me and asked her to tell me when she could. The letter was 10 years old. Telling the truth had an expiration date that we ignored. I started drafting a message for my extended family, explaining the motel, the trust, and why my couch was not a solution. The draft sounded like a press release for a heart. I deleted the draft and called my uncle instead. He said he always suspected the paperwork, but thought secrets protected childhood like sunscreen. He asked me to remember that my mother's life was 2 jobs and 1 long promise. I said promises can also be cages. He said sometimes a cage keeps out hawks. I said sometimes it keeps out sunlight. The audit wrapped with minor corrections and a lecture about documentation. I felt older and slightly cleaner. I took my mother to tour to assisted living places. She critiqued the dining menus like a judge on a polite cooking show. At the second place, she softened at the library shelf. She traced the spines of paperbacks and asked about volunteer shifts. We sat in the courtyard and she admitted she was tired of being the adult in every room. I admitted I was tired of negotiating with love. The director offered a short-term stay program while her apartment repaired. I offered to pay and fill the mini fridge with yogurt she likes. She said yes, if I promised to visit without a clipboard. I promised and already failed in my head. On move-in day, she packed only clothes, a photo of me missing front teeth, and a ledger. The ledger made me itch and feel safe. We set up her room and argued about where to put the clock. We compromised by being wrong together. That evening, the trust officer called to verify my mailing address. He said the trustee had authorized a modest distribution to stabilize business operations. I asked my mother why now. She said because I chose care without surrender, and the document likes that kind of math. I wanted to be gracious and managed an acceptable thank you. Then I asked if she had any other secrets on a back shelf. She looked at the window and told me there was one more thing. She had scheduled surgery to remove a benign but growing thyroid nodule. She said she waited because she did not want me to treat her like glass when the audit needed steel. I felt my face arrange itself into worry anyway. I told her I would drive, wait, and bring soup, and that none of it depends on signatures. She nodded and said guardianship never really ends. It only learns new clothes. A week later, Devin finally paid one invoice in full, after my mother forwarded him a letter drafted with very large words. I added her to my imaginary legal department. Business steadied, and I hired a part-time bookkeeper who was not related to me. Boundaries grew like a spine. My mother's apartment repairs finished, and she returned with fewer bins and a louder laugh. We kept the assisted living contact on a friendly shelf. At dinner, I told her again that my door is not open for moving in. She told me again that a door can be loving even when it stays. My family still debates whether I am ungrateful or practical. The group chat reads like a "So AITA for refusing to let my mother move into my small apartment while paying for her motel and short-term stay." Knowing now she froze my account to stop a con, built a trust for me, and secretly raised me after my biological mother her.